Hey, everybody, welcome to the Book Leads podcast, Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Giarmillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of my friends, colleagues, network. So these are great leads that I'll be interviewing on those books. And I want to get to the book that's contributed the most or a lot to who they are, what they do, and the value they create. And so for this series, I'll have three book types that I'll be covering. So the first book is one that I haven't read that my guests will share with me, school me on. The second one is one that we've read together, whether in the past or specifically for an episode of this series. And the third one is if they've published the book, if they're a writer. I've spoken to writers, publishers. In this particular episode, my guest will share a book with me that he wanted to discuss. He knows what I want to achieve with the series. He's a friend of mine from college, a fraternity brother, someone I haven't seen in a very long time, but we follow each other on social media. He saw what I was doing. He's put out books of his own. In this particular episode, he'll be talking about a book that's influenced him, but we'll also cover the two books that he's written so far and a third that is in the making. But let me just go into a little bit of who he is. So for this episode, my guest will be my friend Eric Skilo Lucrezia. Eric is originally from Long Island, New York, and a fellow graduate of Hofstra University. The common thread in his career has always been education, whether teaching, career coaching, working in student leadership and development, or recruiting new students, whether at undergraduate or graduate level, including Long Island University in New York and both Sciences Po and ESSEC Business School, two of the most prestigious institutions in Paris, France, where Eric is joining us now, where he currently lives. Eric is the founder of Candidate Coach, a boutique admissions consulting and career coaching agency working with people worldwide who seek admissions into top-ranked MBA and master's programs. As the former director of recruitment for the Global MBA program at ESSEC Business School, he leverages his vast network and knowledge of the industry to provide customized services for his clients. And Eric has presented as the keynote speaker at various colleges and universities on the topic of careers, and is also the author of the MBA Guide book series, including Getting into an MBA in France, Getting into an MBA in the UK, and Getting into an MBA in the USA, which is coming out hopefully in November. We'll see if that schedule keeps up. But Eric, what's going on, man?
Bonjour, mon frère. What's up, brother? How you doing?
Good. Just crazy to see you because I don't think I've seen you since you graduated, because I think you graduated in what, 2000? No, 99.
Yep, 99 exactly. It
So
was
it's
maybe
been that long. I mean,
20
it's
years
just
about.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, more than that. You keep up with people on social media, but it's just great to finally sit down face to face and have this conversation. So thank you for, seeing what I'm doing, supporting what I'm doing, and then, yeah, being here for this particular conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man. I love the idea. And yeah, social media. I mean, I kind of have to. It was my choice about 14 years ago to move out of the country. So thank God for things like Facebook and stuff to keep in touch with family and friends. You know.
Yeah, I remember when my dad came here from Colombia, and the only mode of communication back to my mom before they got married was writing letters. So
Yeah.
it's just insane how instantaneous we can connect. So I'm thankful for that. As we jump into this, why don't you go into who you are today, your background, your profession? What is it you're doing? What's your specialty? Give us a flavor for what you're up to today.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because back when we met at Hofstra, I was studying biology and chemistry, and I thought that was the path I was going in the sciences, in medicine specifically. I was really looking at physical therapy or some kind of doctor, and I graduated with that degree. I was getting into physical therapy schools, and I was doing my volunteer hours, and I started to have to work with some of these patients that were more in geriatrics, and I was doing a lot of dissections too, humans. Now, I had already done like cats
Wow.
and sharks and salamanders and all sorts of stuff, but when I had to do a human, that freaked me out. I was not into blood, and I realized very quickly that health and medicine was not the path I was going to go down. So I had to regroup, and that was just after I graduated. So let's say around 2000, and I ended up deciding to get my master's in education. I got a job at CW Post Long Island University, and that ended up being something that really changed my path, because not only was I getting my degree there, but I was working there. I ended up staying there for 8 years in two main roles. I was doing recruitment and admissions for 2 years, and then the last six, student leadership and development. And that opened up a lot of opportunities for me to get into a lot of different areas I hadn't thought about before. The recruitment piece was very cool, so that kind of whet my appetite for international travel and the whole sales aspect in education, which a lot of people don't think about. Right, schools are in competition for the top talent, so it's a whole universe there. All these school fairs and stuff that schools attend and so forth to get to attract top talent. But then the leadership development side was what kind of got me into the whole coaching thing. And total 8 years working at LIU, I ended up going on this trip to Europe, and I absolutely fell in love with Barcelona, where I moved a year later. Um, then I was just teaching English, ended up coaching a lot of people who wanted to get their resume or prepare for an interview in English. So that was kind of what I was doing there. I was a year in Barcelona, a year in Sydney, Australia, doing the same thing. Believe it or not, there's a lot of there's loads of people from
Wow.
all over the world in Sydney. So I had a lot of um, clients from China, Thailand, Lebanon, and so on. And so when that year was up, I
Crazy.
was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Back to New York for at summer 2010, and I was like, you know what? I'm not done with Europe. Let me try Paris. And at that point, I didn't know anyone here. I had a baseline level of the French language, which I had taken back in high school.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, I'm still here. So
So
something was a,
it's worked out.
yeah, yeah, I'd say so. I'd say so.
But yeah, I remember connecting with you on Facebook, I think, long after college. We'd be in touch
mm,
here and there, lost touch for a bit. Then obviously on Facebook, it recommends friends and we connected. And I just kept seeing how you were like in different places. That I
yeah,
knew you were living in Spain at the time, but it was just so cool to always see you and for work, just all over the world. So I mean, that's just an amazing experience.
it's pretty nice when your job pays for your travels, right? The flights, the hotels, the meals. So that was a cool experience. When I first got here in France, I didn't know anyone. So I started off just teaching English. I did really old school, like literally tacked up papers on the wall with a tarot with my phone number and email address, and it actually worked.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
really
yeah.
worked. I had a full schedule of English students, and it took about a year before start to build relationships, make friends, and develop a network enough where I could get back into education. So that's when I got that job at Sciences Po, which this is actually the mug I still have from that place. Um, and and it's funny, come full circle. As I'm coaching now, I have some clients from various countries who are now applying to study at Sciences Po. So I know the place very well. It's like a top institution.
Awesome.
Anyways,
No, but
tell
it's
me.
just amazing that you've been able to tap that into your books, which we'll get. I definitely want to mention those that we'll definitely get into. Uh, what was it? What was it? I mean, obviously, you gave me the reason why biology and healthcare and medical wasn't for you.
Hmm.
So, was it really just happenstance that you kind of fell into CW Post and that arena? Did you think, okay, now this is the direction? Was it kind of like a holdover that worked out, or you're like, okay, this is the direction I definitely want to go in? Was there a particular moment where you knew that that's the field, the area, coaching students, coaching in education that you wanted to be in?
The coaching thing came up by surprise, actually. So the job at CW Post LIU was actually, well, our mutual friend Laura that we mentioned earlier, before we got on the podcast, who knew of an opening in the admissions office. So it was just by chance that I was able to get a job there, and knowing that I wanted to do my master's in education there, that was an avenue that afforded me free tuition. Right, as
Yeah.
everyone knows, education in the U.S. is so expensive. So that was just a really cool opportunity. And working in the admissions office, I was like, hold on, there's the travel aspect, which is fun. There's the sales aspect, which I really enjoyed. You're kind of helping people figure out their path and so on. So that kind of clued me into the coaching thing.
Yeah.
And maybe a year in, I realized, I got a whole like skill set of, knowledge and information that people don't necessarily have. Kids in high school, they don't know anything. Their parents half the time don't have time to understand applications or the financial aid process. So I started even back then doing a bit of coaching, like here and there on the side, where, this is in 2001, and I was charging parents basically like $1,000, and I'll like help your kid get into college kind of thing. So I worked with
Hey,
them throughout. a
I
whole
mean,
year. And
listen,
yeah,
if you got the kid into school, I mean, it was win-win. I mean, you delivered the value, so right?
exactly, exactly. Because they would be either intimidated or a little bit sometimes too laid back and not really be as motivated to do the proper research to understand, like, what's the best school to go to, based on my goals, my personality, and so on. Like, how far do I want to be from home? Like, that sweet spot that Ray Romano talks about in his comedy, like far enough that your parents are not going to come every weekend, but not too far that they're going to spend the night. Like,
That's I mean, that that's why yeah, from Connecticut, I went to Hofstra. It was nice enough where they couldn't drop in, but if I needed something, I could go home or they can come,
right.
and so that was perfectly me. You were a little closer. I mean, you were from where? Huntington, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A
So I
little
grew up like 30 minutes from Hofstra.
yeah.
So
So
yeah,
as I started sharing this series and putting this out there, and you had commented, I think, on a post or reached out in a message, and I asked you if you would consider coming on, and I knew that you had your books, and I think before you knew that I would talk to people about their own books, I think you had brought up the book we're going to talk about today.
yes,
So why don't you introduce us to the book we're discussing and how you came across it? So yeah, just how you came across it, and then we'll dive into questions as to the overview of the book.
sure. So the book is titled Obvious Atoms. It's kind of a funny title that I actually heard about from a friend while we were on vacation together in Malaga in Spain a couple of years ago, and he had it with him. It's a real light read, actually. It's barely a book. It's almost like a brochure. You can really finish it in like half an hour.
Okay.
But it's really stood the test of time in that it's one of those books that's like a business school favorite that's recommended by professors over the decades, and even a lot of corporate people like CEOs and so far managers tend to recommend it to their teams because they really like the message that's delivered in it. So it was published, I think, in the 30s originally, and it's been reprinted, reprinted, reprinted. Um, Basically, the story is of a guy who Adams is his last name, right? And he starts off as a kid, and he's in school and sees a guest speaker come in who's from the advertising world, and this guy impressed him so much. He's like, you know what, I want to work in advertising, and not only that, I want to work for this guy. And he went home and thought about it, and he said to himself, the obvious thing to do would be to go to this guy, go see him in his office, and tell him, I want to work in advertising and I want to work for you. It seemed like the obvious thing to do, and so he
Yeah.
went and did it. He
Yeah.
went and did just that, which not everyone would have the courage to do. Not everyone would have the idea to do that in the first place. And even if they did, they might say, no, they would never accept me or wouldn't want to hear from me. So he went and did it. He had the courage or the craziness, let's say, even to do that. And the guy thought, he was like, this guy's kind of funny. Maybe not the best or the brightest or not exactly the kind of person we're looking for.
Yeah.
But you know what? This guy, he had the confidence and the courage to come and see me. And let's give him a shot. That's kind of how it starts off.
Yeah. So I mean, does it go into his time there, or does it end as he's coming, or what is it that the business schools gravitate towards? Is it just the initiative that Adams takes, or yeah, what is that lesson that they want to draw? I mean, you've worked at some of these top business schools. What is that message that they take from it?
I think the main takeaway, there's maybe a couple takeaways, but the main one I would say is that I think a lot of people, when it comes to making a decision or solving a problem, they tend to get bogged down with too many other variables, and they're not, able to think clearly, essentially, right? They may hesitate a lot, what is it called? Paralysis by analysis,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That's
I bring that up a lot in this series. Yeah.
do you?
That's me. Yeah, oh yeah, that's me to a T.
Yeah. So, I mean, and understandably, especially these days with the internet, it's this amazing tool we have at our fingertips, but there's sometimes too many options, that you're just
Yeah.
like, I don't know which way to go. Sometimes, like maybe before you join a new platform, like, so something I'm looking at right now is Medium, because as you know, I like to write. You know Medium?
Yeah, I posted some stuff a couple years ago, and it was kind of like when I was like in a testing phase. But yeah, I've just got this itch to write, so I want to get back on there and just start writing and sharpening um, that skill. I mean, writing for me is like so therapeutic, and you know how it is, man. I mean, you have these ideas, you want to capture them. You can provide great commentary on your experiences traveling the globe, whether it's making friendships, starting over in a different country, whether it's education, graduate, undergraduate.
Mm.
And I think from when I joined then to now, that platform has kind of exploded where there are more tools, there are more avenues that you can use to kind of get your stuff out there. So yeah, actually it's on my list right here. In preparation for this conversation, set up Medium. So yeah, no, I
There
definitely
you
know.
go.
What do you think you think you're gonna stick to a particular field? You think you're gonna kind of just whatever comes to you, you're gonna write about, or
Well, so I was talking about paralysis by analysis, and the reason I brought up Medium is because like I'm thinking about getting on this platform. I did create an account like maybe a year ago, as I was starting to publish these books, and I thought it would be a good way to get my name out there, samples of my writing, and also link it back to my website and so on. And then here I am a year later. I didn't do anything. I have a good friend who writes a lot and very well, by the way, named Susie Kalik, and so I follow her. And like before I post my first article or entry or whatever you want to call it, I'm like, I should watch some videos. I should learn about it. I should make sure I don't fall into any pitfalls or mistakes. I want it to be perfect. And then what happens? I still haven't done anything.
it's a year later? Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So
It's I get that. Yeah, it's kind of like with this podcast. It's like, I
you're
put
doing it.
together some marketing materials. I'm like, the platform, what do I do? What are the tools that I should use? But at a certain point, you just got to admit, listen, like the first couple takes, whether it's an article, whether it's maybe you're making a movie and literally taking different takes, you can refine it as you go, but we tend to wait until our idea of close to perfect is set in motion. Then it's like, okay, now we can launch. I mean, we have to get into this mindset where it's all right to be a work in progress, that the effort that you're putting in is just as important as like the final product that you put out.
Just like both of us in our coaching businesses, at some point you have to say, okay, I know as much as I can know right now, and I'm going to go for it anyway. And then you refine as you go along. I'm a year into coaching full time, where I've left a company, and I've not just been doing it on the side, but I launched Candidate Coach as a brand, as a service, full time, just about a year ago. And a year in, you learn things. You put yourself out there, you see how the public responds to your offer, and you make adjustments. And so that's part
All
of the
right,
process.
there's a couple of things we're working on here. Okay, so how does the book end overall, not specifically, but how does the what's the story arc of the book that is kind of that makes it impressive? Like what's the package of the book?
Sure. So, I mean, throughout the story, there's several anecdotes of him, up to the challenge to come up with, like I said, it's advertising, right? To come up with these campaigns, and a lot of times people doubted him, or he didn't get the first crack at the job, for the agency. Someone else who was more senior got the job, and maybe it didn't work out. And they say specific examples. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
he either because his senior person his gig didn't fail, or from the very get-go he got the opportunity, and he was just able to do something that was so simple. And sometimes the client was like, well, I didn't need to get some fancy advertising guy from New York City to tell me something I already know. It's like, yeah, but does your public know that? Do your customers know that? Like, sometimes it's very obvious to you, but you don't make the connection that actually what
Ah,
you're doing
absolutely.
what you're doing that may be obvious to you is not obvious to the general public, and they should know about it, and that's where they're going to choose you as your product or service.
That's such a great point. And I've learned that over during the pandemic, which led to this series.
Mm,
As soon as the pandemic started, I'm like, all right, so how do you do networking? And then you're attending forums and discussions. There's a speaker, then you can chime in and whatnot. And I just
yeah.
realized how much people don't tell their story. And I've
Mm,
realized that with coaching clients, where it's like, it's not a heavy lift, the coaching, because it's amazing how much people leave on the table that they're not sharing of themselves. It's not that they come to me because they've exhausted everything they are and they need something to push them over the line. It's like they're not even tapping in to the obvious, like who they are, what they can share. It's just it's crazy, and it's so powerful and it's so simple. That's why I love that message. Like even though it is, like you said, a pamphlet or something that small, it's such a huge message that makes such a big difference that you have to convey who you are. Like you're right. You can't wait for the packaging. You can't wait. Maybe the best route is walking up to somebody and say, "How can I help you?" Instead of, "Oh, how can I, how can I package it so that they maybe see it over here in a messaging." No, I mean, I love that obvious component to it because I think we just, whether we're paralyzed or we're just like over researching, we don't tell our story directly. And I think hopefully the pandemic has woken people up to that based on where we are
Mm.
in this pandemic, when we get back to normal, do not wait, tomorrow's not guaranteed, get yourself out there.
That's where a lot of my clients came from, people who either lost their jobs directly due to COVID, or there was some kind of other loss. Either they had a close call with death, or they did lose someone in their lives and they realized, you know what, this life is too short to be doing something I don't love, and they wanted to
Absolutely.
change. And so,
Absolutely.
as you were saying, like sometimes people don't see or don't tap into the skills, the gifts, the talents, whatever they already have, and it's obvious to us. And that's basically the principle behind consulting, right? Fresh set of eyes and ears on a situation, on a person, on a company, and it can be relatively easy to point out, hey, you should try that, or have you thought about this? And in my sessions, I do a lot of question asking and mirroring back.
Yep.
Sometimes a little diagnostics, but mostly it's conversation and teasing out some ideas and stuff.
That's such a great point. It's like, it's crazy how much of it isn't. You just mentioned diagnostic, right? So you can
Mhm.
go in and, in my other series, I work with a fellow coach, and our series is about just everyday topics, but we talk about how we're going beyond the check boxes in that
Mhm.
conversation. So the check
Sure.
boxes are those diagnostics you're talking about, but it's
Mhm.
amazing how much comes out from just regular conversation,
Yeah.
asking them questions. And you're like, what is it that you're doing the rest of the time between sessions? Are you not having these kind of conversations? It's amazing how much people convey if you just ask them the right question.
Hmm.
It shows you
Sure.
the power of conversation. So I love that you brought that up.
Well, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to. They don't have someone they either feel comfortable talking to, or
Yeah.
some they trust enough, or they think, oh, no one wants to hear about me. It's boring. But it's in a way it's like going to a therapist. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this
Yeah.
this is a person who's a professional, who's a good listener in theory, right, who is there to and knows how to mirror back your thoughts, and not just to give you advice that is just like, I'm not like dictating, you do this, do
Yeah.
this, do this, like, hang on, what you just said there, that was really interesting. It seems like you really have an
Exactly.
affinity for this, or you really like this. Have you thought about pursuing that as a career? Have you did some research, or like how that could be a career path for you, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff? um
So, okay. So how does the, well, no, not how does the book end? Because people, I want them to kind of to read the book, take it on and take those lessons for themselves.
Well, I will
Now,
answer you in another way, maybe like another
okay.
takeaway from the book.
Sure.
The main one is like doing the obvious thing is often the right answer, right? That's kind of the first takeaway, hence his nickname that he earns over the years, and kind of retires, sells off into the sunset with this name. But I would say uh, the other one is that the obvious thing, or seeing the obvious thing, doesn't always come easy because it requires thinking. And this is kind of message two. It's like kind of like higher level thing. And he does make a comment to the effect of, uh, you know, not everyone wants to do what the hardest thing to do is, which is thinking. Or maybe better stated, sometimes the hardest thing to do is sitting down and thinking about something, and people will avoid doing that at all costs, according
Yeah.
to him. And so what is obvious? Because people ask him, well, how did this come to you? How does this stand out as so obvious to you? Well, because seeing what is obvious takes analysis, and analysis takes thinking. And so when you look at a problem, to like stop and block out the noise, all that
Yeah.
side stuff, and really think about it, and then the solution kind of just stands out to him anyway in this story. And I think that sort of connects very well with what we're talking about with coaching and the world of consulting. The book is based in an advertising world, but it really alludes to the benefits of consulting as a whole industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that path that you were talking about. Is it that you have to think about, is it more thinking to get to the obvious, or is it just less thinking? Do you know what I mean? Just kind of blocking out the chaos and just kind of going back to like point zero. I guess, I
I know what
mean,
you
you could spin it either way.
Right. Like I think you're saying like avoiding overthinking and like getting bogged down by like that's what I kind of started off with. This guy was like not doing what a lot of people do by getting bogged down by too many distractions and so on. I guess
Yeah.
there's probably a sweet spot between the two, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of reprogramming. I mean, we grow up in like an anxious, stressed out society where everything has to be perfect. It comes from like, grade school where you either meet the standard or you have to stay back and your tribe will go on ahead of you. And I just think
Mm.
just that structure alone echoes
Traditional
in
testing.
it just echoes into adulthood, and
Mm.
it's where a lot of people's fears come from, is just that fear of failure, because you're just like, okay, if you fail, what is it that happens? Like, what is on the other side of failure? What do you think is going to happen? Are you going to stay back? Are people going to laugh at you? So it's just buried in our psyche, but I think it all comes from when we're students, and it's a shame. But
Mm.
hopefully, just a book like this is just it opens up their minds to just the obvious, just
Mm.
to use that word, of what's there, and what they can achieve if they just kind of, yeah, get out of our own ways.
Absolutely.
So now, and when I said, okay, let's go back to the book, it's not that I wanted to forget about any of the other stuff, but we talked about the pandemic. We talked about, you mentioned coaching and pulling the trigger on that full time. So now, I mean, we'll jump back to obvious Adams in a minute, but tell me about, yeah, coaching, pulling the trigger full time, and then at what point do you decide to write a book or books?
Yeah. So after I left Sciences Po, which was the first school I worked at here in Paris, I worked at ESSEC Business School. So I was the director of recruitment for the MBA program there, and that was great because I kind of went back to my roots at Long Island University where I was doing the travel, but it was much more international. I mean, I've been at this point to I think 62 or three countries,
Wow, it's
and it's
amazing.
been pretty amazing. Yeah, exactly. And it's not just like, oh, I've been there once. Like China, for example, probably 20 times.
Wow.
Um, Now it's pretty intense. Like,
Oh
like
yeah, of course. I mean,
you
you're there
know,
for work. I'm sorry if I'm making it sound like you're on vacation or anything like that. Yeah, I know
no,
you're
no,
there
no,
for work.
no. Oh, I've always made the most of it. Don't get me wrong. Like if I had like a day here or even a half day, it's like I'm in Beijing. Bam, let's go see the Great Wall. It's only a 2 hour bus ride. Let's do it. And now, back then I had a little bit more energy, I would say, but I got to go to all over Latin America, North America, East Asia, Middle East, of course, Europe. So that was really cool. I like the travel. I really love the sales aspect. When you work at a business school, especially at the MBA level, it's hyper competitive. These
Yeah,
schools are really fighting for top talent. There's these like rankings. There's multiple ranking systems. The students, they're also fighting to have the best GMAT score. So it's pretty intense. And so I would go to these events and usually you'd get set up with somebody that was more or less along the right criteria, and you'd talk to them and you'd see if it was a good match, if what they were looking for was what your school had to offer, and so on. And if you had a hit, man, you would bust your butt to get them to convince them to apply to your school, and then work with them throughout the whole application process, usually a couple of
yeah,
months. So I would be coaching them. And back when I first started at ESSEC, it's interesting because this is a top ranked French school, but its MBA was a young program at the time. So imagine a very well respected institution with a baby of a program that they're
yeah.
trying to like launch, right? So when I got there, they only had at that point 3 graduating classes. So 1 year program we're talking about. MBAs in Europe are usually 1 year versus 2 in the US. So, anyways,
Okay,
they
okay.
had only 3 classes graduated so far. Unranked program I'm trying to sell, and it's really hard because I go outside of France and people are like, "What's ESSEC?" That's not matching up with the domestic reputation that it has. So
Yeah,
I knew right away it was very important to get this program ranked. So there was certain benchmarks I had to hit to get that happen. And then once I did, it started to gain traction, and it was easier to recruit people because now I had this international reputation, right? So in order to do that, to gain the trust of people, because think about it, John, like if you're going to pay all this money to do an MBA, you want to go to somewhere with the top reputation, good ranking, and all that stuff. Why would you go to a school that's not even on the map yet?
yeah.
So you got to negotiate a bit. You got to offer scholarships as an institution to sweeten the deal. Now, what's good about this school, like I said, it's got a great local reputation, top quality professors, all this stuff, and now they're really in the game. But to build that trust in the beginning, what I would do is I would kind of like do this coaching like unofficially on the side. Like I'd like, critique on their essays and on their resume, help them out, leading up to the interview. So all the stuff that I do now, I was doing a lot more than the average recruiter, I think, just to build that trust and relationship to get them to go for school that wasn't really, Harvard at that point,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that really is what kind of honed my skills and really, developed my interest in working with people on this kind of one-to-one coaching basis. So when the pandemic happened, like a year and a half ago or so, and I was leaving ESSEC, this was like the natural choice for me to start this coaching agency, let's say. So that's how I got to here. And yeah.
So then the book then. So the pandemic hit. I mean, what was the thought process? What was the thought process when you left the school that it was just strictly to go full time, or were you going to do something else in the meantime? Was it strictly to coaching?
Yeah, so okay, so that was kind of a multi-layered question. I got promoted in I think 2017 to the director role, and I knew that after a couple of years, I wanted to, you know, it's funny because I'm all worried about everyone else's professional development. I have to like stop and wait. Hey, think about your own too. So I was already thinking about a move, and by 2019, July 2019, it started to become clear that I wanted to like look elsewhere. And then it just kind of everything kind of lined up, in 2020. It's like, okay, this is a sign, you
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah. It took a global pandemic.
right? For a lot of people though, I mean, like I said, a lot of my clients who come for career diagnostics, that's really why actually.
Yeah.
But with respect to the book, funny enough, that Christmas of 2019, I was in London, staying with a friend, and just this conversation we were having, I had this idea for a science fiction story I wanted to write. So I started writing that, and then when COVID happened and everything like shut down, and I was done with ESSEC, um, I was like, you know what? Actually, I want to write a guidebook with all the knowledge I have about business schools, about getting in, the whole application process. And I had this idea for this guidebook. It was just going to be one though.
Yeah.
And then as I started thinking through what I wanted to include in this book, like not just about like applying, but also, okay, getting the visa, getting scholarships, like moving over, like finding an apartment, all this stuff. Hold on, that's going to be very different from country to country, right? So I had to do more than one. And it was originally maybe like I'll do regional. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be like the Lonely Planet of MBA guidebooks, like
Yeah,
country
you had
specific.
mentioned that. So can you tell me a little bit about that series? You had mentioned it to me that it's like Lonely Planet, but I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Lonely Planet guidebooks. They're really popular travel guidebooks. I think they started in like the 70s. It was like a couple that was like um, doing the back in the day what they call that like Europe on a shoestring. Like it was like the
Okay.
cheap way to like travel and see a bunch of stuff. Back then it was all about the Euro Rail and so on. Since then we've had like Ryanair and cheap airlines and stuff. But anyways, yeah, they developed this and it's become a huge international brand. Like they have like, Lonely Planet France, Lonely Planet Brazil, India, and so on. And so it's a pretty known, I don't know if you know any travel guidebooks. There's another one really popular in France called Routard, like Routard. It's
No,
spelled, I
I
guess.
I I I'm not a traveler. And I live vicariously through you. I've never been a traveler, so that hence why I never heard of that book.
Gotcha. Yeah. So basically, it's a travel guide that tells you everything you need to know from A to Z on that country. So that's the concept
Gotcha.
for like. So I got one over here somewhere. Yeah, this is about the UK, right? So it's
Yep.
everything you need to know about MBAs in the UK, right? So it takes you from like how to research MBA programs correctly, what are the questions you need to be asking yourself and to the schools to find like the right fit, getting your resume in order. Now that's already something that's going to be different. Like if you look at even just the UK, which is right next door to France, very, very different on the resume, which by the way, we call a CV. Um, the US and Canada are pretty much the two places where they say resume, but the CV.
Figures.
At least Canada's on the metric system. We got some catching up to do, I guess.
All right. So yeah,
so
so go ahead.
no, no, no. So the resume is one first difference that kind of stands out. There's a lot of things that will be the same, like the researching and like how to write essays and preparing the GMAT. All these tests are going to be the same wherever you are. But then, especially when you get into like the visa, scholarships, moving over, finding an apartment, opening a bank account. There's all sorts of different things that are going to vary a lot
Just
from the
nuances from country to country.
exactly. So like the concept is like straight to the point, no BS. Here's what you need to know. Twist the humor here and there. So it's meant to be a quick read. Like you can jump around from chapter. You don't have to read them in order. And chapters range from like 2 to say 8 pages. So
Okay.
it's supposed to be very practical, to give you what you need to know. And voila.
Kudos to you, man. That's amazing. That's amazing. And plus, you have the third one coming out for the U.S., right? And I think
Mm,
in a previous conversation, you had mentioned that for each of these, you had partnered with somebody in those countries. Is that what you
correct.
were?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, really important because, okay, I mean, I've worked in France and MBAs for 6 years, so I know it pretty darn well. But I worked at ESSEC, so I wanted the perspective of someone from another school. So my friend Tina, she's been recruiting forever at a school called INSEAD. INSEAD, by the way, they
Yeah.
they
Oh,
were
yeah.
ranked number one in the world for full-time MBA programs, like above, everyone else. With well, I should mention there's a caveat because this year, because of COVID, the top 7 U.S. MBA programs decided not to participate in the ranking. But that doesn't mean that NCI didn't earn their stripes because even a few years ago, they were already number one above Harvard and Stanford and so on, MIT. So it's no joke. So she worked
Okay.
there
So
recruiting
wait,
for the.
Eric.
Tell
So
me.
side question.
Yeah.
So what is it? What is it that stands out that makes a school that good? What do you think? Having traveled the world, having seen different schools, knowing what you know about the schools in the states, what is it? Is it the international exposure, the international diversity of maybe the staff? What is it that makes? And I'm assuming you may agree with that ranking. What is it that gets it up there?
Yeah, I mean, so usually when we talk about rankings, it's the Financial Times rankings. That's kind of the most looked at. But there's a bunch out there. There's not only the FT. There's like Bloomberg, U.S. News and World Report, The Economist. Each one has their own methodology. So you take it with a grain of salt a bit. Can be a lot of variation from one ranking to the next. But looking at the FT, they have a whole multitude of factors to take into consideration. A big part of it, yes, is the professors, like what percentage of them have like PhD in their degree in their field, how many publications they've done, this and that, diversity among the staff, and so on. On the student side, it's also diversity, like in terms of national origin, but also gender. A part of it has to do with aims, like were their goals met by the program. A good
Okay.
part of it, of course, has to do with salary. That's a lot of what people want to know. How many, what percentage salary increase did you have from before to after the program? I might mention that it's always measured with graduates from 3 years after.
Okay.
The
Okay.
true measure of the ROI, the return on investment of your MBA, is usually starts to be felt 3 years out.
Okay.
So there's a process. So how did they earn it? I mean, yeah, INSEAD is highly international. It's been around since I think they had their first class in 1949. Interestingly enough, it was a part of the Marshall Plan, if that rings any bells from high
Wow.
school
Really?
history class.
From
Yeah.
my from my school, yeah, history class. Yeah. Wow. Really?
Yeah, the
Huh.
Marshall Plan was part of like reconstructing Western Europe after the war, right? So part
Ah,
of it
that's
was
right.
education. And so it
That's
was a,
right.
a Harvard guy who actually set up INSEAD back in the day. So they have got a history, and it's about the reputation of their alumni, their profs. So it's a mix of stuff.
Okay. So, and one more question I always want to ask anybody that's written a book is, what have you taken away from? And I mean, this particular episode isn't about those books, but since we're there,
Yeah.
what have you learned from writing those books? Like, I'm always curious as an author that's written a book, how somebody is looks at things differently. And I mean, it may be different because it's a guide about something, but
Mm.
how has that changed your lens? Has it made you more curious? Obviously, you want to write more. What has that sparked in you? What does that look like?
I think writing, in a way, is a little bit parallel to teaching because you by saying it or writing it, you are refining your own message, right? So
Hmm.
I've gotten better at explaining some of the things that I would explain, say, in a coaching session or just talking to you like this. I know how to communicate in the most efficient way as possible a lot of the ideas. So that's one thing. The other thing, as you said, because it's a guide, and as you mentioned, they're collaborators. There's contributing editors for each country. really important, because as much as I know a place, like, so I have Tina for the France one, with the UK one, a woman named Anwen. So she's from Scotland. And so she filled in a lot of my knowledge gaps, so part of it is like the collaboration aspect that's really interesting. And yeah, taking in different perspectives and coming up with synthesizing something that's like clear and concise, that has like at the same time multiple perspectives, but certain common truths that you can like put forward in as efficient a way as possible. That's
Awesome.
what I learned.
So then, specifically, how has now we're jumping back to Obvious Atoms. Once you read that book, what shifted in your mind? Now I know the general idea. You mentioned what you took away, but did you see the way that you interacted with other people, the way that you spoke your truth a little more? I mean, you've always been a very open, very honest, very direct, very curious guy. But did that amplify what was already there? How did it change you in the everyday, whether it was your life, leadership, career, once you
Yeah.
read that book?
Um, well, to stop the hemming and hawing, and so really for me, the impact of Obvious Atoms on this book series is the title. It says exactly what it's about.
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
I was thinking about a bunch of different titles, and I was like, no, stop trying to be too fancy. Stop trying to like come up with
Catch
something
eyes, just
clever, yeah, or catchy, or that's going to be like, it's going to sell on Amazon. Or I thought maybe I should like poll some people about like what they thought was a good title. It's like, you know what? First of all, be simple, be obvious, and believe in yourself. You know,
amazing. So you think you're going to do the science fiction?
oh, I'd love to. It's a really good question. I've written a bunch of stuff. When COVID happened, Paris locked down, France locked down, I should say, in the middle of March. It was St. Patrick's Day, actually, it was the first day of our lockdown. And
Okay.
we were lucky with some really nice weather. And I am very lucky that I have a hammock on my terrace. So even though we were locked in, I had this little slice of heaven, like, and it was peaceful because there was no cars. It was like amazing.
Yeah.
So I was on my phone every day, sitting in the sun and like, a pair of shorts, getting a tan and writing, on Google Docs, the science fiction story. And then
Yeah.
after that pivoted to the MBA guidebook, but I should be like getting paid by Google, I guess, because it's like literally wrote the book on Google Docs.
Hey, if that's
Oh
the
my,
tool that did it, hey, it worked.
yeah,
S-
exactly.
So when it comes to packaging the message of Obvious Atoms, like obviously you've shared a lot of tips, you've said it in so many words that expresses what you've taken away from it, but how would you, if you could put it in uh, a nice brief package to somebody, and especially across different industries, that it doesn't have to be one particular industry, how would you express like the main message of this and the urgency, I think, behind being obvious?
Mm, okay, what is the main message behind this book and
And
the
how would you
urgency?
express it to somebody that well, I guess there is no, the book itself is in the advertising field, but how would you express the message of the book to just anybody who could use it in any industry?
Yeah, like I said, it does start in advertising, but I think it really alludes to the value of consulting and by extension coaching, like what we do. But that doesn't have to mean you have to be A, working in consulting, or B, seeing a coach to benefit from this. I think that, as you said, you could apply it to any industry. And so the main takeaway is like, um, you know, don't have paralysis by analysis, first of all. And the answer is probably already in front of you or obvious. And but before that, like I said, I think it's about stopping and thinking. So taking a moment and thinking about it, and then the idea is there. And
Yeah.
believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. The answer that's come to you is the right one. Usually the first idea you have is the right answer. And then you like consider this, consider that. That's healthy to a point. But I think you also, maybe it's healthy to set limits. It's like, I'm going to give myself, depending on the situation. Is it 5 minutes? Is it 5 hours? 5 days? Whatever. You have to come up with it based on the situation, and what is your deadline, right? Um, Give yourself a window to reflect and think, and then say, that's it. I think deadlines, by the way, are really healthy, in general. If people don't have deadlines, they don't do anything. And so
Yeah.
giving yourself a deadline before someone else imposes it on you is probably a good idea.
Yeah, especially. So, I mean, the when did you read the book?
A couple of years ago.
Okay. So, I mean, you're still using it like in a day to day, that mindset is still with you in the day to day.
Yeah.
Not every single moment, but it's stuck.
Totally. I mean, like, so the funny thing is, I didn't go to business school. I didn't do an MBA, but I've just worked in the field, and I've developed a business sense from being a recruiter back at LIU, and then again at ESSEC, but also from all of the students that I've been surrounded by. I've learned so much from them. That's been a really cool experience too. Uh, Working at a university, I've often said this is kind of like business light. It's not a cutthroat, ad agency where people are getting fired and like you have high pressure and bosses are shouting. Academia is gentle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
But I mean, you still have that variety of people come through. I mean, the school
totally.
that I went to for my master's it felt like an international school because there were people just from all over the world, from Europe, from China, from
Yeah.
India, from Africa. So there's something to be said about just all those experiences. And I mean, this podcast is a way for me to get more experience instead of going back yet again for another degree. It's like I want to pick all your brains about the books you're
Right.
reading, the experiences that you're having, collecting these things, these ideas, these conversations. So yeah, it's good that you were paying attention to all those interactions. There's just so much value in those.
I've often said to the people that I'm like working on recruiting, like candidates, we call them, or prospects earlier on, and I say, you don't repeat this to a professor. You probably get mad because they have the title, the doctorate they've really worked hard for. But
Yeah,
arguably you're going to learn more from your fellow students in the class than from that professor, because although he or she has the degree and all the prestige and written articles and so on, he or she
yeah,
is one person. And
yeah,
that classroom is filled with people from all over the world that bring, their experience, their perspective, their different ways of approaching and solving problems from different countries and from different industries. And that is
absolutely.
just a richness that you can't deny. And so,
Yeah, and it's not to take away from the professor, but like you said,
not
it's
at
just
all.
whether it's the professor or not, even if it was a student and you just get their perspective, that's not enough. It's that exposure to all that variety, all that diversity.
Yeah. And so, like, and not everyone has I mean, I think travel is just like the best thing ever, the best education you can have, but not everyone has the ability to, either financially or they've got family constraints or money or whatever it is. Joining a program like you did with all these people from all over the world, like brought the travel to you, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like a good workaround to still gain that insight from all these different perspectives. But, a lot of people fall into the trap. Like, I mean, when we were undergrads, I mean, I knew there were international students, but I never really took the initiative and reached out to befriend them and to pick their brains as much as I wish I had. And I could have learned so much more from them. And same thing for the international students. A lot of times they come from, whether it be China, India, Italy, whatever. And a lot of them tend to group together because, when you're away,
that's
you
what it
miss home.
was. Yeah, I think that's what it
Hmm.
was when we were undergraduates. I remember all the different groups, and they kind of just stuck to themselves. So it wasn't that none of them wanted to learn from each other. Maybe it was, I don't know, some of it. But yeah, like you said, when you come from so far away, you gravitate towards a group. But luckily, with the graduate programs, typically, you're not going
Hmm.
there with a group. You feel a little more comfortable in your skin. If it's a language barrier, hopefully by the time you get to the graduate program, you feel a little more comfortable in it. So when you walked into a class and you see every color of the spectrum, every representation of every corner of the globe, I'm glad that I was able to go to school because I didn't have that in my job. So I was able to go to school and have that. And I just think it comes with maturity, being curious about other people from different backgrounds. I don't think we looked at it the right way when we were younger, not intentionally, but we just didn't know enough to
Yeah.
just be curious and to gain that insight.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we had that maybe that kind of guidance, because like the people that were our mentors and parents and stuff, they didn't even necessarily have that exposure or the reflex to say it. We were maybe among the earliest generation to have so much international
Yeah.
students, but anyway, never
Um,
too late. Never too late. But I think it's always good to be curious, as you said, and to take the initiative to talk to somebody who's new or different than you, because you're probably going to learn something.
yeah. I can't state it enough. I try to as much as I can, but you're absolutely right, bro. So in wrapping up, is there anything else you want to mention, share? Why don't you give us, you provided all the links. I'll share it when I post this episode and whatnot, but it doesn't hurt to mention it again. Anything that you want to share, like your books, the different editions, when the third one's coming out?
Yeah, third one, getting into an MBA in the USA is coming out in a few weeks, more or less. So either late October, early November. So I'm pretty excited about that. And there's a fourth and a fifth lined up too. The Canadian and Spanish ones are next on the
Really?
list.
Look at you.
Yeah, there's a lot of great MBA programs in Canada, in Spain, and there's about 10 or 12 on the total list. So after that, I knew my first five going into this in the order: France, UK, USA, Canada, Spain. So like kind of those five countries, that's like 85% of the MBA market, to be honest.
Okay. Okay.
It's yeah. And then China has become a really big contender with MBAs. There's a few great programs in Australia, in Singapore. India has several that are real contenders on the Financial Times list. And then back to Europe, there's a few more like Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Belgium. That kind of rounds off my list.
You're gonna go through. You're gonna try to make it through all that.
That's the plan. I mean, I've already like kind of lined myself up. I've, like I said, partners in each country to fill in those knowledge gaps.
Yeah.
So I've already got exchanges with people in a lot of these countries, lining myself up for it. It's not going as fast as I hoped, but I suppose 3 books in a year is pretty
I was gonna say, Jesus Christ. Put it in perspective. Yeah, I
good.
mean, just you're talking about countries, you're talking about introducing people to new ways of doing things, new ways of seeing things. I mean, a guidebook for a country for something that's so stressful as picking out a program. I mean, you should give yourself a lot of credit, man. It's amazing.
Yeah, it takes a little bit more time than I realized, especially when it's going to come down to like China. I mean, Australia, I've lived there, and a good friend of mine, he's a recruiter there. China, it will definitely be a bigger learning curve for me.
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
No, but you'll find the resources you need to get it out there.
yeah, hope so. That's the plan.
All right, buddy. It was great seeing you. Thank you for sitting down
You
with me
too.
for this conversation, for the book, Obvious Adams. And it's the story of a successful businessman, right?
Exactly.
All right. I really appreciate it. If there's anything that I might have missed in this conversation with Eric, please let me know. I have a lot of questions, but maybe there's something that I forgot to ask or that you would seek value in. But in any case, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening and take care. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.